Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right. Here I am again. It was nice having that guest speaker and Skip preaching for us the other day. So, we were kind of doing this series on the commandments of Jesus, and I was going to take the commandments, love your enemies, which is Matthew 5:44, and do unto others as you would have them do unto you, which is kind of goes along with both of these things. So, anyway, we'll read those in just a second. But, we live with people, and some of them are aggravating, and some of them we get along with fine, but, things can change in a moment. I used to work with a surgeon. He was a really good surgeon, but he was kind of a curmudgeon too. A little bit of one. And he'd come into the operating room, and he would address us all. There was nurses, and I was the anesthesiologist, different people in there. He would address us all as sports fans. Good morning, sports fans. How you doing? And then the case would start, and it wasn't that the patient was doing bad, but the things can, if they don't have the instrument right when they want it, or they don't have this, or something happens here and there that it gets aggravating. So from going from sports fans, he'd go to, we were boys and girls. Now boys and girls, we need to do. And then as things got worse, and, more he got frustrated, it would be, people. So it just shows you, that we can get aggravated pretty quickly at our fellow workers, and it's just, we need to stay on top of the game on the thing. So let me go ahead and read these verses that give these commands. And so the first one is Matthew 5:44 through 48, and it's love your enemies. So, he says, well, I'll start at 43. You have heard it said that you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he makes the sun rise on the evil and on the good, and sends rain on the just and on the unjust. For if you love those who love you, what reward have you? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? You therefore must be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. All right, so he's telling us to love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. And then on this other one, it's in Matthew 7:12, which is right there. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them, for this is the law and the prophets. So, Jesus, he was confronted. He says, if you follow me, they're going to persecute you. He says, and he says that as they persecuted him, his whole ministry, they were just trying to trap him in different things and to catch him on different things. And so in this verse, it says, and this is Matthew 22:34 through 40, it says, but when the Pharisees heard that he had silenced the Sadducees, so the Sadducees just had their chance at him. He says, they gathered together, and one of them, a lawyer, asked him the question to test him. So here they are again, a different bunch that don't even like each other are still trying to get him. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? And he said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the great and first commandment. And then he says, and the second is like it. And then notice there, he's telling that loving God is the most important thing of all the law. That's the highest commandment. But then he says the second commandment is like it. He says, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So he's comparing this love of God with how we should love our neighbor. Of these two commandments depends all the law and the prophet. Okay, so here he is telling that there's nobody else, and with everything you got, you're supposed to love God. And he says, the next thing is that you're to love your neighbor as yourself. So on these, and he says, on these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So the whole thing hangs on these things. And think about that. Loving God is the main thing, and loving your neighbor is the next main thing, and they're related. He says this other commandment is like it. And that's the most important thing that we're going to do in our relationship with God, is that he comes first, and then it talks about your neighbor comes second. And how does he say to love your neighbor? He says to love him as yourself. And why does he use that comparison, love him as yourself? If you think about it, there's no more person more important than ourselves. We're supposed to love God with everything, but look what we do for ourselves. We think about ourselves all the time, how we look, how we're going to present ourselves, if we're comfortable, if we're cold. We do all these things to to take care of ourselves. And he's telling, so we don't have any trouble with relating to how we're supposed to love our neighbor, is we're to treat him as good as we're treating ourselves, which, it seems hard. And for a while we heard, that you need to, there was kind of a movement that said, well, you need to learn to love yourself first. Well, I don't think anybody has any problem with that. Even the people that say they hate themselves and they, they'll express that. But in reality, they may be feeling bad about themselves. But do they really hate themselves? If you think about it, if you hate yourself, if somebody says something bad to you, you should be happy about it. If they treat you bad, you hate yourself. If they treat you bad, you ought to be glad. And that, nobody's like that. So, that maybe that they love themselves a little more than they think, because if they're treated bad, it even makes them feel worse, and they should feel good about that kind of thing. So we got these two things. We got love God with all your heart, with everything you have, and love your neighbor as yourself. So these are the basics that we're going to work on. And now, when I used to play football in high school, the coach would say, we got to do the basics. And he says, the basics are blocking and tackling. If you block and tackle, you're going to win the game. If you do it right, you can't help but prevail. And we heard this over and over and over again. Sometimes we did, and sometimes we're successful. But basically, that's the basics. And the basics in this is love God and love your neighbor as yourself. All right. This is kind of a mess of a thing here. It says, okay, so when it talks about your neighbor, and we're to love them. It doesn't exclude anybody. We're supposed to love the ones that treat us good. Like Jesus just said, he says, if you greet just the people that greet you, what do you got? Everybody does that. If somebody's treating you good and you treat them good back, what have you done? There's no group that doesn't do that kind of a thing. So basically, he's telling us that we need to love those that are good to us and those that are bad to us. He says to pray for your enemies. So this group is all inclusive here. It's the nice ones, the ugly ones, the bad ones, the ones that are prevail over us, and the ones that are under us. We're to love them all. And Jesus explains, they asked him who was the neighbor. And it was really, and we all know the story. He picks this, this guy gets injured, and he picks this person that the group he's talking to utterly despised. They despised those people so much that when they would go from Galilee down to Judea, which was south of Galilee, they would walk all the way around, and there's a direct shot right through Samaria. But a lot of them didn't even want to go to Samaria, and they'd go all the way around Samaria just to get to the other part of Israel. So, and he uses that guy as treating the other guy well. And he says, who was the neighbor? And they said that the one that did good to him. So, so basically he's telling this, that even the people that are despised and that we don't think much of are our neighbors, and we're supposed to love them and pray for them. And so, anyway, I wanted to read a little bit. Phil Robertson wrote a book called Happy, Happy, Happy. And in the book, he goes from being a man that didn't know Jesus to a man that did. And he lived a rough, sinful life for a number of years. And then he came to the Lord, and he realized that, that things were different, and he was studying his Bible. And I just want to read you one little, it's kind of long, but I think it's worth hearing, about an encounter that he had that changed his attitude on this kind of thing. And I'll just read that. So, like I said, it's a little bit long, but hang in there. When I was still a commercial fisherman, I sometimes had over 100 hoop nets and trout lines stretched all the way across the Oshita River. But these pirates on the river kept stealing my fish. Now, people have been shot in Louisiana for taking fish out of one else's net or off the trout lines. That might make sense when you realize someone's livelihood is being stolen. When I saw people stealing my fish, I'd run them down with my shotgun and scare the daylights out of them. It didn't do much good, though, and they kept stealing from me. But I kept scaring them, and I was making enemies up and down the river. People were probably saying, that old sucker down there is about as mean as a junkyard dog. I kept reading and studying my Bible while the stealing continued unabated. I read Romans 12:17-21. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful to do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my dear friend, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge, I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he is thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. Do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. I read this verse and sat there thinking, there ain't no way that's going to work. No way. Be good to them. but Lord, they're stealing from me. But then I had a revelation. Hey, wait a minute. I never tried that. I keep running them off with a shotgun. It always made no sense to me, but I was going to try the Lord's way. So I decided the next time I saw someone lifting one of my nets, I would initiate the biblical way of dealing with him. I was going to be good to them. Sure enough, I walked out one day and heard a motor running. I looked and saw some guys pulling up one of my nets. I stood there and watched them for a few minutes. My boat was parked right on the riverbank, and I took off running and jumped in. I had my shotgun with me. I was going to try God's way, but my faith was still weak. So I had my shotgun as insurance. I was going to try to be good to them, but if they wanted to get mean, I was going to have to survive. So I ran out on the river, and these guys were still coming up with my net. I cruised right up to them. They saw me coming, dropped the net, and threw the float back in the water and started fishing. Hey, what are you all doing? I shouted. We're just trying to catch some fish, one of them told me. What were you doing with the net in your hand? I asked him. Well, you know, he said, as he started stuttering and mumbling, what is that? Is that what it is? Is that what it is? I repeated. You all know what's on the other end of the float. Then I changed my tactics. In a cheerful and exuberant voice, I shouted, good times have come your way. They looked at me, wondering exactly what I was up to. I still had my hand on my Browning A5 shotgun. What one of them asked? Good times have come your way, I said again. I'm going to give them to you. You were going to steal my fish, evidently you planned a fish fry, but you ain't catching any, but you want a fish fry. Since you didn't catch any, you were going to steal them. Well, here's the good news. I'm going to give you what you were trying to steal for free of charge. No, we were just going to, one of them started to say, but I cut him off. Nope, you want a fish fry? I said, you're going to have a fish fry. How many people are coming? I reached over and grabbed the rope of the net and told them to keep their boat right there. Let's see. What's all we're fixing to catch? I said, and raised my net and looked in. Oh, y'all would have done pretty good, I said, but then I'm sure they figured I was certifiably nuts. I got a lot of fish here, I said, get your boat over here. They started paddling and were watching me, probably making sure I wasn't going to shoot them. I dumped the fish from my net into the boat and told them to bring the boat closer and began throwing even more fish into their boat. What about the big white perch? I asked them. I'm probably supposed to throw him back. They don't. What do you think? Nah, we'll keep him, one of them said. The fish kept hitting the bottom of the men's boat, and they kept watching me throw them over. Finally, one of them protested mildly. I think that's probably enough. Look, you start a fish fry and kinfolks will start showing up you haven't seen for months, I told them. Let's make sure you have enough. So I threw all of my fish into their boat. Now you got plenty, I said. Yes, sir, that's plenty. Well, they replied, now here's the deal, I told them. Why steal something you can get for free? Man, look, we're sorry, one of them said. I understand, I said. Look, I live right over there. From now on, come up there if you aren't catching any fish. I'll give you all the fish. The way you won't have to steal them. You'll get your fish. You'll be happy, happy, happy. I let the net back in the river and said, good to see you all. The men pulled away in the boat and started motoring down the river. They had plenty of fish. They were looking back at me, probably thinking, and this guy for real. Maybe they remember I had a shotgun and were about half scared, but I never saw them again. After that episode, everybody quit stealing from me. Every time I saw someone eyeing my net, I offered them free fish. I was giving away less fish than was previously being stolen from me. I reread the text, Romans 12, and thought, you know what? I get it. That the Almighty is saying is that no matter how sorry and low down somebody might be, everybody's worth something. But He's never going to turn them if they're as evil as they are. If you're good to them, you might appeal to their conscience, and if they have any conscience. Now there are some people who might be so mean they probably can't be good to, but most people are perplexed after someone is good to them when he should have been mean. Most of the time they end up giving up their evil ways. The Almighty was right, as He always is. The incident on the river had a profound impact on me. From the point forward, I wanted to help others, whether it was by sharing the gospel and baptizing them, giving them fish, or assisting them in any way possible. Over the past 20 years, my sons and I have literally led thousands of people to Jesus Christ. So, it's just an example. I thought it was really good that, try it the Lord's way. We want to, when people are mean to us, we want to kick back. But as Christians, we're not supposed to do it. And He's asking this thing that seems, worldly. It's an unreasonable thing to love your enemies. I mean, they're enemies. That means they're against us. But we're to love them, and we're to pray for them, and we're to to want their own good, just like we want the own good of ourselves. Let's see. In John 15:12, it says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friend. You are my friends, and if you do what I command you, you are my friends if you do what I command you." Jesus. Well, I should read this first. In Romans 5, 6, and through 9, the writer of Romans says that it's talking about Jesus and the love that He has for us, and that the Lord loved us, even though we were His enemies at the time that He loved us. And here it is right here. "For while we were weak, at the right time Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one might dare even to die. But God shows His love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since therefore we have now been justified by His blood, much more shall we be saved by Him from the wrath of God. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God by the death of His Son, much more now that we are reconciled, shall we be saved by His life. More than that, we also rejoice in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation." So, we were God's enemies, and He still loved us, and He still sent His Son for us, and He gave up His life. He says, the greater love has nobody but to give up his life for his friends. And so, even though we were His enemies, He gave up His life for us so that we could be His friends. I also wanted to read 1 John 4:20. I didn't think I marked that. 1 John 4:20. I'll read that one too. If anyone says, I love God and hates his brother, he is a liar. For he who does not love his brother whom he has seen cannot love God whom he has not seen. And if you look at that as what Jesus said, that the love of God is first, but the next commandment is like it. And he says you have to love your brother also. He said, and it's related. And he says, John says, if you're hating your brother, basically it'd be your neighbor. If you're hating him, then, he says that, you see him and you can't deal with him, but how can you love God? He says, if you say that you love God, but then you hate your brother, he says you're a liar. So the two go hand in hand. You have to love God, we need to be loving our brother. And that's the way we show our love for the Lord. So it's not a complicated thing, but it's it goes against our human nature, and but when you do love the Lord, then you're wanting to do what the Lord has to say, and you're wanting to please him, so you're going to be doing the things that he wants you to do. And as your love grows, it becomes easier to love your brother. Just like Phil Robertson there, he was hating these guys that were stealing his stuff, and when he put it into practice, that what the Lord said, do good to those that are doing your enemies, pray for them. And it says, that quote where it says that by doing these things, you bring burning coals on their head. You can see how those people that were stealing his fish, when he did good to him, the shame that they had on him, that would be what the burning cold thing would be. But we're not wanting to pray to them so that they'll get scorched here. We're praying for the good, and that they'll change, and that they'll recognize that there's something different about those people that love God, because they're going to love their fellow man too. So we know that the Lord loves us. You know that he died for us, that Jesus died for us, and he shed his blood for us, and we need to take that into consideration. If you have anything you want to bring before the Lord that we can pray about, or if anybody wants to, be baptized or whatever, we can do all this here. But thank you. That's my lesson.